It's showtime!
Welcome to the podcast Tools, Not Rules, Filmexplorer's Editing Collection, Episode 3 with Beatrice Gibson. Filmexplorer met the French-British filmmaker Beatrice Gibson in London. Her films are known for their experimental and emotive nature, also thanks to a strong concentration on montage. Exploring the personal and the political dimension and drawing on cult figures from experimental literature and poetry, she incorporates co-creative and collaborative processes and ideas.
Ghostly in the dawn without his way.
I've been very influenced by modernist composition as a way to construct work and as a way to think about work, both in terms of how it's produced, but also in terms of how it's edited and put together. Modernist composition in the sense of more experimental structures from experimental literature or experimental music. Composers like Cornelius Cardew or John Cage, for example, they're interested in a sort of interplay between control and chaos, right? So you have a universe that you've composed, but within that, lots of things that you don't have control over. So I'm interested in that kind of a structure for generating productions or thinking about productions in relation to those structures. So,
more in general, when you start a project, it's certainly quite different from project to project, but do you have something like an image or a sound or an atmosphere or a text? What is a starting point for a project?
Well, it's very different with each thing. Generally, in a very boring way, I will watch all my rushes and label things very specifically. Take 1, 2, 3, for example, but also things in categories that make sense to me. And then some kind of a logic or an intuitive starting point will come out of that. But that's the sort of boring, technical, organizational answer.
But actually, the question is what is even not about editing, just in general.
Yeah.
When you start a film project.
Yes.
What is the main thread, the things that...
What's the trigger? It's often a text or a historical reference of some kind, whether it's a composer, a thinker, or a piece of literature or a piece of fiction. A bit later down the line, a piece of music. Like when I'm actually literally editing and I don't know, I don't have a sort of storyboard in the conventional sense, in the way that you would when you're making a fictional edit. If I start with a piece of music that I might later take away, at least I have a tone, a kind of exterior logic that allows me to put things next to each other in a way that makes sense, like rhythmically, essentially. That's a kind of trick. In a wider sense, it's often a text or a specific thinker or a specific composition, for example, in relation to a composer. I think sometimes if you're trying to think of what happens to my character, those kinds of questions, they can be really too heavy to deal with. I don't know what happened. I can't think of a story I can't pluck a story out of thin air. But if I work from this more unconscious, more intuitive place where it's visualizing a space, whether it's a garage or cinema or a karaoke bar, and I put my character or a series of characters into those spaces and think about what they do and what they say to each other, then I can start to create something that makes sense.
For example, we had a long discussion with Bellatar about editing, because he's the
master,
one shot, but in a sense there is a discourse of editing in his works.
It's very structural, it's very formal, from one scene to the next. It's highly
and
composed,
it is sort of pre-editing. The scene that he creates, they are very, very detailed.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a script. It works really like an editing table, where you really organize the construction.
Yeah, kind of designing the film in advance,
So what about you? What's happening before?
Yeah, I think very, very specifically about each scene and about what's going to happen in that scene. And often those decisions are also collaborative based on who is in the film. We think together based on their own history. And in the last few films, they've been friends and poets, performers and artists who, to me are extremely interesting and rich characters, but also are very capable in terms of producing material. So we have long conversations over time via email about what those scenarios are, whether it's reading something that they like or a dream that they had or an experience that they'd like to relate, something like that. But then, so that's the person, but then also, the space they're in is also very designed, either together with them or I have a particular space I want to put them in. And then I have, quite a conventional process in the sense of I put together a lot of reference for a kitchen, and I have work with a location manager who helps me find the perfect kitchen or, whatever the space is. So it's very, very, very considered and very detailed. And then how that space looks once I've found it. The best thing is finding a space that is amazing, because that's cheapest, the cheapest route. But maybe we'll change that space if I don't like the way that it looks. I could change the lighting or change the objects, or something. I might work with an art director. So quite a conventional process in that sense. But then to me, the really extraordinary thing that always happens is that I spend, days and months preparing all this material very specifically, and then the thing that I shoot, it has a life of its own. It's not the thing that I thought it was going to be, and that's when I feel I know that I've made something successful, because I produced something that I didn't know I was going to produce, and it becomes this other thing. And it's just funny to look back when you think, it seems like all these things were so specifically decided, but yet the thing itself, and then the thing, once it's put together with other things in the edit, becomes something completely different. So no matter what you design, like cooking, I guess, the taste of the things altogether is something completely different, yeah.
Do you feel that these new possibilities in technology are pushing you to film everything?
I mean, I work on 16mm mostly. I finish on video. It's not that I show them on projectors or anything. I'm not a kind of 16mm purist, but I like the restrictions of 16mm. So I'm not necessarily qualified to answer that question. That would be a radically different way of working from the way that I work. Because it's 16, we have to be relatively disciplined. And, 4 or 5 takes for one thing is quite a lot. That should be, more than that is getting into dangerous territory, so cost-wise. So I have to think very rigorously about what I'm filming beforehand. In a way, it's the opposite of the total coverage logic. And also, I work on film, so I have a monitor, but the monitors are not very good, so you can't really see what you're getting. So there's a sort of alchemy also that I'm not... I guess it's a bit old school, but I really enjoy those restrictions. I like the not knowing exactly what I've got and leaving things a little bit to chance. I mean, I can see whether something hasn't worked. I can see whether to do it again. But it's always like when you get the rushes back from the lab, it's like, wow, what a shot. I didn't know it was anything like that. And I kind of enjoy that lack of control in a way. The rest of it, like I was saying, is so designed. So it's like an opportunity for the opposite. Structurally, I have to be disciplined also. I have to think very specifically about what's in the frame, and I enjoy that, yeah.
Just come to the act of editing. So and the question is the where and when. Did you prepare the moment of editing? Do you some yoga before it? It demands a lot of concentration.
Yeah, it's very addictive. Starting it is very hard, I think. My process is mostly I'll go through the rushes and then go shopping or something, and not shopping, but like any kind of distraction. That thing of starting when you have this mountain of possibilities is also a really beautiful moment, but it's very overwhelming. I don't know, it's kind of a mood thing to just find the courage to sit down. But then once you get into it, it's very addictive, and then you can't stop. But I always take breaks. I take big breaks, which is a real luxury. It's a luxury of being an artist and not working in a more industry context, because I take like a month break because I can't see the material. After a while, I don't see what I have anymore, and I need to take a step back. I like the idea of being slow for lots of reasons, lots of political reasons also, you know, as sort of anti-speed, anti-neoliberal, anti-capitalist reasons. You know, I'm aware of the privilege of slowness, and it's very important to me to also protect that slowness in a way. It's like a slow ethic or something. The thing that happened with it, what was really great was shooting things episodically. So shooting, editing, shooting more, editing, shooting more. And then, you know, the work is so much more able to breathe and able to be responsive to the world. It's very different from like, I'm going to shoot a man on a horse and then I'm going to edit the man on the horse and then I'm going to deliver it to the client, you know, that's like, and that's going to happen in 3 days. This is like shooting something, having a feeling about it. What do I need? It's like testament to the fact that I think work really benefits from having space and slowness embedded in it. But also, again, politically, I think these things are important. You know, I can't go away for 8 weeks and shoot a feature. I have children, I have a family, and I want to set up a production that has a kind of labour ethic that is participatory, that allows people who are carers, who have children or elderly dependents or life issues of any kind, that allows them to participate. To do with slowness, you know, the idea of slowness and that being important to me as a part of my process, yeah.
It's very interesting, this question, because it's related to the organicity of the work, and this question of editing and shooting and editing. So this is back and forth. The outside, inside, which is for you the best place to edit?
So I have always just edited in my house alone, in my office with the blinds down. It's too light, the conditions are all wrong, and I like this context. I like that it's so immediate and it's kind of part of my everyday, and I don't go into a special dark masculine feeling hole in order to edit. So I don't have a kind of enigmatic or mysterious answer to that question. Just literally just in my house. That's, you know, it's a very intimate thing. Like, for me, it's a very isolated thing. You know, I've been in this kind of larger context of sometimes, I mean, I work with different size crews. Sometimes the production is very small, but essentially I've been with a group of people, and it's the moment then when you are again alone in this kind of isolated, womb-like exchange with the machine as you're trying to bring this thing together. Another really interesting part that I love, or that is kind of extremely cinematic to me somehow, is the surround sound. Is like doing the surround sound mix, because that's often in a studio, if you're lucky enough and you have the cash to do so, in a big room also, big or small. That's really when you get like a sense spatially of this potentially immersive thing, and the kind of very cinematic quality of like being in space, being in an auditorium, being in a theatre, and being flooded by sound and image. So for me, that's when I'm like, wow, I've made a movie. Before that, it feels sort of abstract. It's like just me and my little machine trying to get this thing together in this sort of private and fragile way. Yeah.
About methodology, you were starting before. I mean, yeah, in a sense, it's boring, but in the other sense, what is interesting when you try to understand how do you edit, and there is two magical words, and one is sort of functioning, or auf Deutsch is funktionieren. It works. And the other thing is intuition. In terms of methodology, is there something that you follow, that you use?
Yeah.
Or it's really just a question of intuition, and then you say, okay, it works.
The intuition thing is annoying because it's a bit like smoke and mirrors, isn't it? I mean, I suppose if you're not an editor and someone says, oh, you just do it intuitively, you're like, what does that mean? But it is. I mean, I definitely work intuitively, and like when you know it, if you sit down at a computer and you work with an editing software and you put two things together, it's like they share something that works, right? It's like whether it's a tone or a color or a sound, or there's something that makes two images feel right together, and that is a real thing. But there are more tangible things also that I try to use. You know, I'm really interested in, like, my films are essentially quite abstract, but I am very interested in cinema and in narrative and in the kinds of tropes that cinema uses to engage the audience, whether that's emotion or humor, or, you know. So I always try to start with something that's going to really make the viewer give a shit. Whether that's like something emotional, so they care about what happens next, even though nothing happens, or whether it's something surprising so that they're like, wow, what is this film? Or like using those things as an alibi to keep someone watching. And if you do that at the very beginning, then you sort of have them on your side. And then you can kind of, you're free to do what you want, really. But I feel like you definitely need, in a way, this like sort of trick, conjurer's trick at the beginning. I often feel when I'm watching films, I've been on juries of things, I know really from the first shot whether I'm going to like the movie or not, or whether it's a good movie, or whether it's, for me. Yeah, it's a significant sort of trick. Gertrude Stein always used to say, her big thing was she loved crime thrillers. So that's something I've used in my editing technique quite a lot, is this idea of like the thriller, and then there's kind of like, what's going to happen next? But in fact, nothing really happens. And so your expectation about something happening is frustrated. But at the beginning, there is this idea that something is going to happen. And so Gertrude Stein was really into kind of trashy crime thrillers for that reason. She loved like the idea of inquiry, the idea of the search and the inquiry into material. And so she took that trope and sort of turned it around and made it reflect on her own writing practice. She always used to say that, like, if you get the murder out of the way, and then you're free to explore the rest of the material. It's like an interesting way to think about it, yeah.
Fights the mind, been at it ever since the first clay tablet set, and seeks relations while heedless and for their changing while doing.
Some people are sort of fetishes for some techniques like post-it or something.
Oh, you mean like
technical.
post-it notes?
Yeah, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I have begun to value quite a lot lately is having a circle of people that I trust, that I choose specifically, maybe 3 or 4, not too many, because it's confusing, who I involve in my edit, and I have them kind of view edits and feedback on edits. And I've only really recently, sounds absurd because it's an obvious thing to do, but I've only really recently done that. I used to always feel very like sort of, embarrassed a bit of the, I wouldn't let anyone in on the process. But this has been really amazing, like being very structured about choosing 4 specific people who are going to help me build the edit and reflect on some of the decisions and some of the material. And that's been amazingly helpful and beneficial. But also, again, I did the whole sort of individual genius sitting alone doing things is not a model that I think is interesting. Nobody makes work like that. We make work in a crowd, whether that's with a crew of people or 4 people you've chosen to feedback on your edit, or 4 poets that you're thinking about in your head. I think we make work together always. We don't really make work alone, or I don't make work alone. That's just not how I work. Yeah.
Well, what about sound? I mean, sound, which is the role it plays in your concrete working process.
Yeah. Sound is pretty key for me, yeah. There not being really a hierarchy between sound and image, so it's not that sound comes afterwards just as a soundtrack, but that it's like really thought about sort of much more in advance at the beginning of even the production process, but also at the beginning of an edit, where it's like, I know maybe what piece of music I'm going to use, and I might edit to a piece of music because the material is quite abstract, so that gives me a kind of atmosphere through which to connect the shots. But even in advance of that, like De Ceux qui ne sont pas seuls, that the soundtrack for that film is made before the film even existed. It was made before I was even really researching what the film would look like. But then I've worked even more conceptually with sound, in the sense that I made a film called The Tiger's Mind, which is about many things. It's based on a score by a composer called Cornelius Cardew. So I invited 6 other artists, performers, musicians to come together to talk about this score and how we could use it to make a piece of work. And the film is kind of a document of that process. So that's an example of like thinking about sound compositionally, and how experimental composition can relate to experimental film production, and what kind of conversation those two things can have. Yeah. Like ways of making music and ways of making films, and how they might interact.
The tiger fights the mind, been at it ever since the first clay tablet set, and seeks relations while heedless and for their changing while doing.
Yeah, about the question of visibility or invisibility. So, are there moments where that you use the visibility of editing, the fact that editing is visible?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm interested in, it's a kind of modernist idea, isn't it? Like revealing a sort of self-reflective revealing of the architecture. I mean, I guess it's like a kind of Brechtian paradigm where you see suddenly the actor talking to camera, or you see like mechanisms at play. And this is also a political thing, right? In the 60s, it was about the viewer being conscious of their own manipulation. I think that definitely still has value as an idea today, but I think maybe in a slightly different way, right? Because we all know we're being manipulated. We don't need to be sort of pedagogically informed in a patronizing way that media manipulates us. We kind of know that. So, or like I'm trying to work out what that concept could mean today, like for a different kind of viewer. I think, for a more media savvy viewer, because we live in a different political era. But definitely interested in a spectator participating in what they're seeing, in engaging a spectator. And I think for me, like, it's important to hold things back, not necessarily this idea of invisibility, but this idea of like not fully saying what it is that you're doing. I think really bad editing or really annoying movies, let's say, are where, the sound is telling you exactly what to feel. You're being overwhelmed by a certain sensation. I think what's interesting to me is structures that are emotional, but they're not quite. Or, a thriller, but then not quite. Something a little bit more enigmatic. And in that enigmatic space, the viewer is invited to be a more active participant in the construction of the meaning of the thing. It's more fun to be a part of what you think you're seeing, It's like a trigger for the imagination. Yeah, I guess it's the difference between like prose and poetry, right? With prose, it's much more explicit, whereas with poetry, it's like you understand something and then again you don't, and then you do and then you don't, and there's this really beautiful sort of flowing between comprehension and incomprehension. I'm interested in that as a kind of editorial structure and what that does to a viewer and what it means about spectatorship, I suppose. Yeah.
When we spoke now, you were thinking about your own projects, and you edit your own projects most of the time, but you told us that you also collaborate with some people.
I did work with a friend, an editor friend, on 2 films called Ben Crooks. I asked him to help me do specific things, like line up specific things that I knew I wanted to see. So in a way, I worked with him in a sort of time-saving way. But then I took on the edit after that. It's hard for me to answer because I'm sort of my own editor. Because I don't have a storyboard in my head in the same way that you would in a conventional fictional edit. It's very hard for anybody else to edit the film. They're kind of like dreams more than they are fictions, and I'm the only person having the dream, unfortunately. So the editing is really challenging, I'd say. There's always quite big issues that come up, and I always have to take a step back or, try to think about a solution. It's not quick. Yeah. I think it's like key. It's where the film is really, really made. Often the problems with an edit, the things that aren't working are where the gold is. It's painful and problematic, but that's where the real material, sometimes where the real gold is, yeah.
Maurice Ravel had a sort of theory, or sort of not really theory, that a piece has always just one note that is fundamental.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that in a sense brings all the elements together.
Yeah, what is the note? What is the tone? I don't know, it's such a difficult question. I mean, it's kind of easy to say in retrospect, yeah, that was the tone, but when you're in it, you don't necessarily see it so instantly. a thing that I often do with films, actually, when thinking about them structurally or editorially, is not simply make a film about a subject, but think about how the subject can inform the construction of the film. So it's like kind of always trying to think about form and content. So this is an editorial question or a compositional question. 'Cause it's interesting to think of editing, not just editing upstairs, but editing as composition, basically. How is a film composed?
Probably a difficult question. When do you feel that the editing process is finished?
Yeah, I don't know. When do I feel it's finished? I think I just know when it's finished, yeah. When there's nothing more to do, basically. When it just feels complete, you know. I guess when I can't do anything more, when there's nothing more I can do to make it better, I suppose that's when it's finished, yeah.
I hope I'm loud when I'm dead.
That was the podcast Tools, Not Rules, Filmexplorer's editing collection. Interview, Giuseppe Di Salvatore. Editing, Ruth Bettig. Presentation voice, Jeanette Wolf. Production, Filmexplorer. Tools, Not Rules, Filmexplorer's editing collection was created thanks to a grant from the Department of Film and Media Art, Cultural, Basel.